Welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid, and it is now the 3rd of July. Like I said, we're already kind of moving through this month. I'm thinking it's Wednesday already. And it's just so interesting because I think when I was out going to the office every day, even though I think I was busy a lot of the times, I would work 14-hour days and very long hours. Somehow the days, and I mean I still really kind of work 12 to 14-hour days. I break it up a little bit differently now that I work mainly from home. But it's interesting. I feel like it's like, how did it get to be Wednesday already? How did it get to be Thursday? I feel like time goes very, very fast. And it's just kind of an interesting, it's probably a perceptual phenomenon, really, more than anything else. Because obviously, too, when we're anxious for something to happen, like when we're waiting for an event, time seems to go very, very slow. So I don't know. It may just be with respect to where we want time to be, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, I had to get up early, and I'm dressed, as you can see. Normally, I'm still. Oh, good morning, Alex. Normally, I'm still sort of half in like my sweats, my pajamas, like in the morning when I'm doing these. But today I had to go drop my car off early because it's due for its oil change. It's been 6 months because I rarely drive anywhere. So I was like, yeah, it's finally time to do that. Fortunately, I only have to drop it off I can see the place actually from my window. So I'm able to just drop the car and then walk through the cemetery and come back home. So so I was doing that early this morning before coming here, but it didn't take me a whole lot of time. So this morning, though, when I was walking back from the car place and through the cemetery, it was very interesting because I'm negotiating a lot of things right now. Like I said, I've got a lot of new ventures coming in. I've got a lot of things, particularly on my other channel, that people want me to get to. Like I took down a whole bunch of material from my first year of my podcast, and people were like, "Oh, put that back up." And I was like, "Well, I am going to put it back up, but I need to edit it because I had just had too many comments about people not being happy about the quality of certain things. Like that there was vocal tics and stuff like that, and people were just like, "Oh, I don't like it. It's unlistenable." So I was just like, "Okay, well." Then I'm going to take it down. I have better editing now than I did back in 19. I'm sorry, not 19. God, listen. Wow, that was that. There's, speaking of time, 2019. It was kind of back then. So I have better sound editing and stuff now than I did then. So I'll probably go back and clean those up. But right now I'm working more on certainly getting the Rouhani out there. I will be putting out probably an advertisement today, but I'm also making a video explaining what Rouhani is, explaining how I've come into it, explaining how it works, and just to give people a little bit of an introduction. I am going to be doing some of those. I'm going to be doing some live ones over Zoom, and I will also be doing some live ones in person, probably here in New Jersey, probably up in Milford. I have to wait for Karenna to get back to the store. She's got somebody else running things right now, but she's going to be. She'll be back probably next week, so we'll talk and sort things out, whatever we're going to do then. And I think I've also mentioned I'm going to be teaching Reiki up there then as well, because I am my Reiki master teacher. I'm qualified to teach and attune people to Reiki. Rouhani will take me about 6 months before they, and I have to have testimonials and stuff, and I will be able then I'll be able to actually teach that as well, which would be really great, because I just think it's just a phenomenal technique. Though it is very intense. I mean, people have talked to me about it. It can be one of those things. I find that it does tend to deal with people emotionally. I've seen kind of different ends of the spectrum. I've seen it where it's just been like, wow, everything just comes in and it just feels like it rearranges everything at once. And with other people, I find that if I specify at the beginning, go easy on this person. They've kind of been through a big, whatever it is they've been through. And then I find that person feels calm and more peaceful after the Rouhani session. So thankfully, they don't, because I think sometimes, especially depending on the person, they want to kind of go to town. The angelic beings that help with that kind of want to just go in and do it. And I'm like, okay, well, Sometimes that's just too much. In the same way that if you have a person who's laying with a broken leg, just grabbing them and picking them up to put them on is probably too much too fast. So, because it's going to be painful. So you want to do things kind of at people's pace. But when I was walking through the cemetery, I actually saw a couple of things. I saw what they call a killdeer, which is a type of a bird. It's a seabird, kind of like a seagull. It's like in that same family. But it's a little like kind of speckled brown bird that's got like a white collar around its throat. And there's a little one that's been in the cemetery. I've been hearing him in the morning, and he makes this very distinctive sound, and he's kind of bounces around. And he's a little guy, but he kind of just bounces around the cemetery. I just see him just bouncing from one place to another, which was kind of funny. So I was kind of following him this morning while I was coming in because he was kind of bouncing along the path. And then I looked on the ground. And speaking of Rahani, one of the symbols of Rahani that you'll see is either an open pink flower of some kind. So it could be a rose, it could be a carnation. Sometimes they show a lotus flower that's pink. But it's interesting because there was a little pink carnation that was just kind of sitting by itself in the middle of the cemetery. And I was just like, well, that's interesting. That's an interesting little sign. And then, of course, I saw there was a little bunny rabbit kind of bouncing around. And to me, whenever I see rabbits or bunnies of some kind, they always have an ancestral feel to them. I've had people tell me before that may be how your ancestral spirits manifest themselves sometimes as bunnies. So, which is also kind of interesting. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it wasn't. But those were the things I saw this morning, just walking between there and here. Now, when I was thinking about the topic for this morning, and yeah, I've got a little itch right at the tip of my nose, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know, that supposedly means something too, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about, the cards that were coming up for me, I kept getting, when I'm asking about what I wanted to talk about today, was like the Wheel of Fortune in particular. The Wheel of Fortune, and it was showing up with some other major arcana. It was showing up with the Magician card, and it was also showing up with the, the Hierophant card. And so, now Hierophant, again, traditionally has to do with tradition. Traditionally has to do with tradition. There we go. Traditionally has to do with, the church, normal religious authority, things like that. Things that we think of as being part of traditional religion or spirituality. Now, of course, the Hierophant can represent things other than that. It doesn't necessarily have to. But as I've mentioned in the Osho Zen deck, it tends to actually it's the no thingness card. It's basically when you're in a blank space, and I feel like that relates a little more to the Wheel of Fortune, because the question is, because we always think about things that we can control and what we can do. Excuse me. Things that we can control and what we can do. The question then becomes, how do we deal when things happen that we can't control? Or that we have very little control over. I think a lot of times when there is something that happens that is, again, and now whatever happens might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing, okay, at least in terms of how it's going to affect us or how we think it's going to affect the world, society. Some things might be a little more ambiguous. It might be like, well, this could be good for us, maybe it won't be. Some things are unambiguously good or bad, depending. And again, that's in terms of their effects. Events are events. But then the question always becomes as to, all right, so how do you manage events? Because a lot of times if there's something that happens, and let's just take it more from the anxiety producing point of view. Because typically if somebody's going to, for example, if somebody's going to come for coaching, or if somebody's going to come for a reading, or if someone's going to come for a healing, they're going to do it because there's something that makes them feel out of balance, or makes them feel anxious, out of control, possibly in despair, possibly depressed. So if we look at that aspect of it, again, not to be negative about it, but the question then becomes, okay, well, what are people's responses to something when it's something happening and that we consider to be a negative? And there's a couple of different ways. Now, number one, the mind always wants to jump in and get involved, because the first thing that we want to do is say, okay, I need to find a solution. I'm anxious. I want to not be anxious. I need to do something to get rid of this anxiety immediately. Like, we need a solution and we need it right now. No dilly-dallying. We need to know right now what we're going to do. Now again, depending on the situation, you know, if you're in an immediate life or death situation, you know, you may have to react that way. You may have to, but is the reaction always the right one? If we think about, let's just say you're out. This is really more metaphorical, although it could be literal. Like you're out for a walk and you run into an animal. You know, you're walking along a mountain trail and you run into a mountain lion, or you run into a bear, or you run into the woman and the bear thing notwithstanding. You run into something that, and but that, you know, or a poisonous snake is in your path, and you can't, you know, you feel kind of like trapped or in this space where if you make the wrong move, that it could be bad for you. Okay. So when you're in a situation, what oftentimes we have, like, what do they call it? Fight or flight instinct. So either our instinct is to run away from it, or our instinct is to stand there and fight. But oftentimes in such situations, what needs to be done, sometimes there's a situation where you should turn and run as fast as you can, but then again, sometimes if an animal has already made eye contact with you, it might try to pursue you, right? So sometimes the only thing you can do is just be very still where you are, right? But our mind doesn't always work that way. A lot of times our mind immediately jumps into whatever our general fear response is. So if we're thinking about something that's less confrontational than meeting a wild animal somewhere where you feel like you're threatened, if we take it more metaphorically, we take it more something that's happening globally or something like that, then again, our response to it is going to be whatever our usual response is. If we are overwhelmed, the mind is either going to jump in and try to dissect it in 20 different ways with all the knives of the mind, or it's going to be a case of you're automatically overwhelmed and you immediately are like, I have to get away. I have to withdraw. I have to go close the door, and I have to fold up back into my shell a little bit, you know, like the turtle. I kind of go pull my head back in because I can't I can't cope with what's going on. And I mean, there's some other variations of that kind of response too. They could be responses where we just, like for example, when things on the news are terrible, it's like, okay, I'm going to shift it. I'm just going to watch something happy. Now again, that's none of those necessarily. I'm not making a judgment like, oh, it's always a bad thing if you do this or that. It may sound a little like that, but again, depending on the situation, sometimes the response that you need to make is to back off of something rather than to jump right in. And again, sometimes when it's something, like I said, somebody who's in a war zone, I mean, they have to react right away. You know, if this is something where you have to, you might want to take some time out sometimes to just sit and think about what's going on, again, without letting the mind take too much control. Because what can happen then is if we take a time out and we look at an external situation, then we start to catastrophize. We start to say, okay, this thing's happened, and that means this is going to happen, and that means this is going to happen next, and that means this is going to happen, and then the world's going to end, and then this is going to happen. The mind will do that. And when you are in a crisis situation, again, that's kind of the default in our current collective makeup, shall we say, is that we immediately want to jump in and we want to, the mind wants to take over and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Or it's going to freak out. And that's one of the reasons that people will try to disenfranchise emotions in a situation like that. They will say, oh, well, if you let your emotions get in the way, then you'll just kind of scream and freak out and cry and not do anything useful, right? But the thing is, I think what people need to move towards is more of an integrated approach. Because, the mind does need to be involved to some degree. But also, we often do need to take, even if we're trying kind of doing it instantaneously. That's why a lot of times with meditation, I'll try to teach you to do techniques where you can somehow put yourself into a meditative state automatically. I've heard about that in certain psychic development classes where they'll say, almost like a self-hypnosis, where people will have an association or something, or a snap of the fingers, or something that they'll do that's a signal to themselves for the body to just calm down. And if they've practiced doing that, counting themselves backwards a little bit and then getting into a space, that actually might be a meditation that I should put up on my channel or up in my group space, because I know I have some meditations like that, and you just kind of count backwards. You put yourself in you start out like in a non-crisis situation, putting yourself, allowing yourself to count backwards, and in what you appear to be a very calm space in your mind. And then when you're there, you may be giving yourself kind of the suggestion that, okay, whenever I see this, or whenever I, do something with my hands, or whatever whatever it is that will, when you bring yourself back out of that mild self-hypnosis state, that you will just know that it will take you back to this very calm place and centered place every time. So I've heard about a technique of doing like that. I mean, people who practice regular meditation, it might be a little easier to do that. But of course, meditation is not a guarantee. When a crisis hits, again, it's very easy to have a settled mind when everything's going great and everything's going your way. So the question is, how are you happy, and how do you have a settled mind when things are not going great? Because the reality is there's times when things are not going great. And the one thing you don't want to do, they talk about a lot of times spiritual bypassing, where we try to just deliberately bypass or ignore things that are, that may be creeping in, that are not beneficial to us, that are not, that are kind of creeping in the background, and it's like it's something that has to be dealt with, or something that has to be looked at, but we kind of do the la 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 la. I don't hear it, I don't see it, and that's really that's part of the flight response. That's part of that response that says that we, we're emotionally and physically drained. And the thing is, you'll notice in those situations that your body will just automatically, whatever energy you have, either it's going to be turned to like turning your stomach upside down, or you're just going to suddenly just feel like, you're going to pass out and fall asleep right there. I know in grief counseling, they will talk about situations like if there is a shock news of a death for somebody, let's just say it's a death of somebody that they're very close to. And then they hear, like, I don't know, they get the notice that somebody's had an accident and they've died, or something. If something's happened like that, people sometimes literally will lose consciousness. There is such a thing, that sometimes people's grief is so strong that they can just, completely, the body is just like, nope, not doing this. And it just kind of, and people kind of, fall out. So everybody responds differently. But the question really is to how one can integrate themselves with change, and how do you have an integrated response to change. And probably the first step, which is one of the hardest ones to establish, is the idea that you need to accept that change happens. And like you will see in Taoism, change is something that is on it's on a circle. It kind of, the circle goes up and the circle goes down. So there's going to be times when everything's going well, and things are going to be abundant, and then there's going to be times when things are not, when they are going to decrease, or when there might be a crisis. And if we think about that in terms of nature, you think about the fact that, okay, yes, we have springtime, and then things are, everything starts to flower, and it's beautiful, and we have summer, and after summer, we move into autumn, and then we move into winter. So from a food growing perspective, obviously spring and summer is when, and then towards fall when we have the harvest, when everything comes in, but then you have to worry about winter when nothing grows, right? So you have cycles of the year. That's a thing. So in addition to cycles of the year, like that, but also within those cycles, you can have strong storms that come in. You can have, that will come in and will disrupt something. Things that might damage your crops. So if you live and die by that. And people, of course, tended to identify the forces like that with different, what they would call daimonic beings. Now that's different. The word demon does come from daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N. Let's talk about a daimonic being. A daimonic being is not an evil being. I mean, not necessarily. Daimonic beings are just these forces that are around us. And Plato used to refer to them as intermediary forces. Okay, they would be, Socrates talked about having his own personal daemon. So in other words, usually the daemon was the intermediary between you and the deity, whichever deity you were talking to, or whatever was the person who was the messenger of the will of the gods to you. So, for example, angels are daimonic beings. I mean, by that definition, because they're often considered to be intermediaries for the numinous, for the divine, and there's all types of daimonic beings. The Greeks tended to also view certain psychological states, as well as these kinds of forces, like the harpies, for example. Okay, I did a podcast on the harpies on my other channel, and the harpies are these. They have like the heads of women, but the bodies of birds, and they tend to come in and they tend to be they're basically, I guess we'll say, metaphorical of storm winds. Okay, and those winds that come in and that can damage things. They're usually portrayed mythologically as these women, like I said, with these female heads. They are sometimes beautiful, sometimes ugly. That's always an interesting feature of how that particular being, just like the sirens and the other ones, like how they're portrayed when they're part female and part animal of some kind. Or even the Furies. Like the Furies were initially portrayed as three beautiful women, and by the time we get to Virgil, there are these horrible, screeching, howling, they become something that's really, really horrific. So, so it all, that's a whole interesting side discussion. But basically, with the way the harpies act out is they will come if people are sitting and having a feast. They'll come and and their bird, they come and they crap on it. I mean, think about it when that happens. Like when the bird, the grackles come through and crap all over your car. I mean, it seems to be a thing. And you're just like, really? Like, I remember I went out, it was a couple months, was it last month? I went out and I was just like, oh my God, I cannot believe it was like this was the community, like, toilet space. So I had spent a lot of time, like, with cleaning this stuff off my car, because I just didn't, until I could get to a car wash, I'm like, I need to get this stuff off my car, it's disgusting. But the idea is that they would soil the food so that people couldn't eat it. And so that's almost metaphorical of the fact that they can do a certain kind of damage that will destroy your abundance or destroy something like that. Destroy your crops. And again, if they're representations of wind, then it can be the way in which we've seen fierce winds knock trees down and things like that. Certainly not power lines in ancient Greece, but there's the idea that the things that you have that may still be growing or maybe in a delicate phase can suddenly be destroyed. So similarly, we have these kinds of things that come in. Now, what the metaphor that they often use, there's the oak tree metaphor and there's the willow tree metaphor. The idea is, so which tends to survive the storm? Now, technically, storms could take out either one of them, but because the willow is flexible, because it bends, the storm, it will tend to bend with the storm, and then it'll pop back after the storm. In other words, it's able to go with the force of the wind. The oak tree, on the other hand, now it's strong and it's solid, and when we think about, if we take that as a metaphor, if we think about a lot of our values, it's just kind of like, no, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to be in control, I'm going to be, I'm going to take action, I'm going to take charge, right? But then what happens in the storm? The oak tree, because it's going to stand where it is, against that force, if the wind is stronger than it, the wind will it may completely destroy it. That's where when I drive through these neighborhoods and I just see literally these big trees just suddenly either cracked at a certain point or just completely uprooted with very, very fierce winds. It's just this idea that sometimes that basically when you are moving in a place where things are moving and changing and unexpectedly and at that kind of a rate, it's like, how do you lean into that? How do you go with what's happening? It's like, I'm reminded of a story, another Alan Watts story, but he talks about a Zen master who is in Japan somewhere, and this is when they had the geisha girls who would wait on people, and there was one geisha girl who was waiting on him, and he thought there was just something about the way in which she moved and she did things that he said, I'll bet she's had Zen training. So he decided he would test her. So he called her to come over to do something for him, and he said, I would like to give you a gift. And good morning, Suda. I'm telling a story about this Zen master and this geisha. And so the Zen master says to her, I would like to give you a gift. And she says, I would be honored. So he takes a piece of coal, because they have like a little hibachi, and hands it to her in a pair of tongs. And so she wraps her kimono sleeves up. She thanks him. She takes it. She brings it back to the kitchen. She has to change her kimono because it's burned a hole through it. And then she goes back to him and she bows and she says, now I would like to give you a present. And he said, I would be honored. So she takes the tongs and hands him a piece of charcoal. And of course, smoking was a thing at the time. He takes his cigarette out and lights it, and he goes, "Thanks, that's just what I needed." So it's just the kind of idea of when you're kind of put it, how do you make use of that unexpected situation? Oh, good morning. How do you make use of the unexpected situation? How do you think on your feet without thinking? That's the hard part. Thinking on your feet without thinking. How do you turn into that space where you are able to look at something? And I don't necessarily mean being opportunistic, because some people can be that way. Like they say, like, "Oh, how can I take advantage of this?" Or "How can I make money from this?" Or "How can I?" And I don't mean being mercenary, I guess, is not the idea. But just the idea of when something, or if there is something that's happening that is, that suddenly feels like it's going to back you into this corner, then it's just kind of like, okay, well, then maybe, there's, what's the other path? What's the way around? What's the different place that this is going to take me? Because either we make use of the circumstances to adapt and to, to work with them. When we get very anxious and upset and say, "Oh, that's it, everything's terrible, and I'm gonna go, either you're gonna go hide from the world, or you're gonna be very, very angry." Sometimes we will act out and we will do things, or we'll make a rush decision. I have to do this and I have to figure it out right now. And it's like, no, you want to figure something out on your feet. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you are, it's easier to do if you're in the present all the time, and if you recognize the fact that things can change at any time. Because we live in a world that suggests that causality is the way that things are. Every effect has a cause, right? Even when we're doing kind of emotional work and digging, or what we call excavation, kind of, in terms of our feelings or in terms of our anxieties, we're always looking for the origin of it. We're saying like, oh, well, does it trace back to this childhood thing? Does it trace back to this or that? Is it a past life thing? Is it this? And, we might have revealed to us what the source is, and we may have that epiphany, that aha moment where we go, aha, this is what the source is. And to be honest, the source of most of this is actually a feeling of isolation. And to me, even applies when we're talking about economic scarcity. There's a feeling of isolation, like something has happened, and now maybe you feel powerless, and maybe you feel alone in whatever the situation is. And oftentimes they'll tell you, well, you have to take your power back. But sometimes the answer is just that there needs to be a sense of surrender. And when I say that, I don't mean surrender in the sense of like, oh, just give up and, but kind of looking at the situation from a different vantage point. And again, it's going to depend on the situation. So it's hard. So I don't want to say, oh, well, when in situation X, always do Y. But the idea there is, it's just kind of, there does need to be, especially if it's not something we're practiced in, there may be where we need to take a step back and not just run through we could run through the logical options of what to do, but that's where we also need to really tune into, what is the body saying? What is the heart saying? What is the gut saying? What's happening here that is, and allowing us to be in the place of saying, okay, yeah, this thing has happened, and wow, these are the feelings that I'm experiencing. Sometimes you do need a timeout, especially if you're dealing with grief or something like that. You may need time to get away, time to just stay at home and sleep or whatever. But a lot of times we feel like we constantly have to be productive. We have to keep doing something. We always have to do something. I have to show that I'm in charge of the situation. I've always got to take charge. And we are in charge of our own lives. We are responsible for our own lives. But sometimes we immediately want to rush in and do 10 things, and then none of them really work, instead of just staying the course and just saying, okay, you know what? Or trying to determine whether or not you really have enough information to move forward, because that's the thing too. A lot of times what really can throw us is the fact that we don't know. The thing we're always trying to negotiate is the unknown. I've often said, the definition of religion is a means of negotiating the unknown. Where we might say, well, I'm going to ask God, or I'm going to assume that there's a deity or something that's looking after me. I've had this encounter with a deity, and that this is framing how or with some kind of what I'm going to call numinosity, something that is other than me, something that feels sacred, and so where am I going to fit that into my life experience? So all of these things are part of it, but it's how we negotiate that unknown. And so, yeah, so a lot of times, the first step to negotiating the unknown, though, really is expecting that there is an unknown. There's always going to be an unknown factor. There's always going to be a surprise factor. Causality is really, David Hume even said it, and he was a rationalist philosopher. He's like, he basically did a whole proof showing that causality, there's no reason why every effect has to have a cause. And that's speaking through logic. And I remember being in as an undergraduate, it was Dr. Garrett. He's one who taught philosophy, and I remember he wrote that. I promise you, I no longer remember the proof, but he wrote it out, and he goes, "Now, this was the most," and he was like, he's almost very satisfied with it, as if he had written it himself. And he's like, "This is literally one of the most bulletproof proofs in philosophy, and it proves that there's no reason for anything, basically." But it was so proud of David Hume about the logic that he had put into this. But anyway, it's because when we're faced with chaos, the first thing we want to do is create order. Okay, and that's just kind of the way we are. We want to make sense of things. Okay, our mind wants to be able to interpret what's going on. But really, the question then becomes: okay, maybe we need to be in a space where maybe the mind doesn't need to understand what's going on. Maybe we just need to sit there and say, okay, what are the other aspects of my knowing or my way of knowing and understanding? What direction are they pushing me? Because sometimes you get pushed in an illogical direction. You just suddenly decide to do something and you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this. This seems, we might even say to ourselves, this seems stupid. But somehow if we are actually relinquishing control, sometimes if we get into that space where, and I don't know, we just, how it is, maybe, okay, it can be just a situation where you just suddenly feel like, I don't know why, but I feel like I have to call this person today, or I have to go here, or I have to do this. And there's no reason for it, okay? But then you'll find, like, in the conversation with that person, that, and if you are talking about the thing, perhaps, that you are anxious about or whatever, they might say, this thing's going on over here, or all of a sudden you just might be able to fill in the gaps in that information. And there's a word, serendipity, and I believe it comes from Serendripa, I think is what Joseph Campbell had said. And but a lot of it has to do with this, and I think it was connected to a story actually. But it has a lot to do with this idea of just wandering about aimlessly, or kind of akin to browsing. You ever go, a lot of people, I don't know how many people go into bookstores anymore. I love a good bookstore. But when you go in, and it's not like, they'll often say in the shop, well, what are you looking for? And unfortunately, I think a lot of online stuff is, a lot of online shopping is predicated on the idea, and even the way they construct library stuff these days, love browsing in a bookstore. Yeah, I think a lot of things are construed these days as, you're not really browsing. You come in and you go into the store and you know exactly what you want. Well, no, that's a place where you might find something. You might find an interesting book. You might suddenly be opened up to a new subject or a new thing. Like, you might start out in one place. Like, generally when I go into the bookstore, I find myself like swinging towards either religion, philosophy, or spirituality, because that's both my academic background and my personal interest. So I'll find myself going there. Or if I'm thinking like, I really wanted to read, this, then I might go over and look for a favorite author, or I might but I'll start there, but that's not where I'll end up. I mean, eventually you end up somewhere else. This is why they ended up putting like coffee shops in bookstores, because the idea is, people want to browse, they want to look at things, they want to think about it. And when they purchase it, they want to kind of sit down and they want to go through it, and there's nothing better than talking or reading with a cup of coffee or whatever your beverage is of choice, right? I mean, it's a great thing. So it's almost the browsing factor. It's the idea that just as we can have unexpected bad events happen to us, we can also have these what they call these serendipitous events. And really, life is really made up of a lot of those. I think the order that we impose on it is something, like I was talking about time when I first came in, how time seems to go faster at some points, and then at other times, like when you're anxious for something to show up, it seems to go slower. But it's all perceptual. A lot of it is all in the head, and it's all in the eyes. It's just, this is what our perceptions are, but we've decided that that's what reality is. And when something happens that eludes those senses, we're like, whoa, what are we gonna do? And so the thing is, it's just, sometimes, just as our mind is not going to be able to sort out the logical answer right away. Again, situation dependent. If you're in an emergency crisis situation, obviously you want to bring the EMTs and the firefighters and the people in who know what the heck they're doing to put the situation under control. But when it's something going on in your personal life, a lot of times it's a case of having to take a step back, and sometimes it means not acting at all. It means just saying, okay, wow, I don't know what to do with this, and just allowing yourself to be in that space. We often are trying to get out of that space as soon as possible, but sometimes allowing yourself to do that and kind of paying attention to the inner voice and paying attention to what's around you, the answer may present itself, because everything works through projection. What's going on inside of us, we see outside. So we might see things that kind of validate or reinforce our anxiety, but then we may also see things that are kind of trying to point us to the way to make use of the situation, or the way to resolve that anxiety. So yeah, a lot of times has to do with that. Our reading for today, we're starting with the clinging to the past card. Okay, now to me, okay, with regard to a kind of general reading here, I think this has more to do with what I'm saying about the way we think of cause and effect, the way we look to the past to define what's going on in the present, the way that when a situation plays out, we're like, oh, this is what happened in the past, or this reminds me of this thing in the past, so that's the way it's going to be now, and allowing the past to define the present. And so there's the idea of, no, you want to let go of that, because again, causality isn't a necessity. Every cause is not necessarily going to have the same effect. Now, again, there is the whole thing about history repeating itself. So yeah, there are certain patterns that sometimes, mainly because human beings don't necessarily change the way that they do things. So it's, and for some reason, for all of our rationality and all the information available to us, everybody kind of tends to gravitate towards doing the same thing over and over again. And as I've said, and I'm not the one to say it, but I mentioned it more recently. Some people call that a definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing, keep smacking your head in the same wall over and over again and thinking it's going to be different next time. So, so we can learn, okay, this is probably not the best thing to do, and this probably is, but I don't know. You that all said, you also need to be open to change. Now, again, more past stuff. Inner feeling of which we're unaware is the past lives card. Now, past lives is also the moon in this deck. So, this is just all that stuff, which might, again, it might have to do with your actual past lives, or concurrent lives, or it could just be it can be ancestral stuff too. It can be patterns that we have, and a lot of times, they've said that a lot of this can make it into our DNA. We can be, if we come from a family of warriors, okay, then it's very hard for us to just simply say, well, I'm just not going to worry about anything. It's, although worrying, there's also a very functional human reason for that kind of a trait as well. But I think what it's saying is that for a lot of people, there's an anxiety about the past. There's an anxiety about something that happened, or trauma that happened, and saying this trauma is going to happen again. And I think what it's saying here is that seems to be the driving force for a lot of things. We think that something that happened in the past that might not be good is going to be the same thing that happens again. And the external feeling of which we're aware, this card comes up a lot too lately, I've noticed in readings, the ordinariness card. Okay, now this is the Eight of Pentacles, or Eight of Rainbows in this deck. And as you see, this is a woman just walking through. It's like she's gathering some kind of fruits, maybe apples, just walking through a field. And she's just ordinary, okay? Not doing anything extraordinary, just being ordinary. When we're in crisis, a lot of times we think we have to take drastic or extraordinary measures. And it says, no, maybe you just need to be ordinary. Just keep doing your thing. And instead of saying, well, I'm doing my thing, but, this might happen and that might happen, You just do your thing. And there, this is a card of success. Just keep doing your thing. Just be ordinary. Be in your space. Stay grounded. Don't try to do things. Just do your regular thing. And really, with these two cards here, it's kind of like be in the present, And really, truthfully, the Six of Wands is also a card of being in the present, because this is a person who's riding the tiger. They're having all this fanfare. So this is somebody who's being recognized for an achievement or who is demonstrating leadership. This resonates so much. Just do your thing. Yeah, it's just and the thing is, this is also a card of being in the moment. The Six of Wands is like the victory you have in the moment. And again, to go back to the Taoist idea, it's like, yeah, you have the victory in the moment, and then another day, maybe there's not going to be as much of a victory. But things cycle back and forth. So if something's been down, it'll be up again. It's saying you'll have the victory. And yeah, we have this Nine of Wands as the outcome, the exhaustion card. And again, this card, Nine of Wands, they call this the Wounded Warrior card, right? And it's like it's the idea that we're sick of repeating the same thing over and over and over again. It's like, for heaven's sakes, when are we going to get off this cycle? When, why is it like, oh, I'm faced with this situation again? Well, what am I going to do? This is amazing. Your reading's saying to stop being reactive. Yes, exactly. Stop being reactive. So you just take time out to listen to what's going on. It's kind of like if somebody says something to us and it triggers something we don't like, we immediately want to be defensive and jump in on that person rather than stopping and listening to the rest of what they have to say. And we're already automatically planning how we're going to respond or rebut or whatever. And so it's similarly, as I've mentioned, there's no nights in this particular reading, but if you've been watching this regularly, we've had a lot of night energy. And again, night energy is I need to rush in and take action. Because this is why I say we're in a very masculine-oriented society. Because the masculine way of doing things is if there's a problem, then you have to take control and you have to fix it. You need to use your mind and you need to take an action. We need to take this disorderly situation and show that we're in charge of it. And a lot of times the universe tries to show you that it's in charge of you. And you actually can gain more strength by saying, okay, I'm not in charge of this situation. And the solution will present itself, Decided to pull one of these as well. Yeah, renewing is our oil card of the day. And the word is forgiveness. Now that's interesting with regard to the past. Trigger statement is, I didn't deserve this. So in other words, if you're in a situation, again, that's the other thing too, self-blame, where we may feel like, oh, I didn't do the right thing, right? The true statement is, I forgive. It says, allow labels of judgment to disappear. See situations and individuals through the heart, and also to forgive yourself. Because that's the other thing too. Sometimes when we're in certain situations, we think, well, what could I have done differently? And we start immediately to jump in and start beating ourselves, like going, you should have done this and you should have done that. Well, that old hindsight is 20/20 business. But you know what? You are where you are, and there's, the outcome's going to be what it is. So so when you're flowing into a very difficult situation, there's this sense of needing to bend, to bend with it, to be the tree that bends rather than the one that tries to stand there, stand firm, and then breaks. I just think, I think a lot of people find some comfort in the idea of standing firm, and maybe there's times when that philosophy could work, but it can also lead to a stubbornness that doesn't allow us to see a new way of doing things. So, so I feel like we're all being kind of challenged to do things differently, and that's I feel like that's a refrain I've been repeating over and over again. And to myself as well. I'm saying this to you, but it's not like I have it all figured out. It's because it's the same thing. It's just kind of like, okay, as stuff comes up, we've got to see, what the next thing is doing. In the meantime, you keep doing what you're doing, and figure it out. So, So anyway, so that's our little coffee clutch for today. I've just finished my cup, so I wanted to say thank you guys so much for joining me, And I do hope that you have a really great day. If you're in the U.S., I mean, tomorrow is July 4th, and it's a holiday for most people. So whatever you're doing tomorrow, I hope you're enjoying it. You're so wise. Thank you. Well, thank you for saying that. Sometimes I feel like for every little bit that I know, there's like a zillion things I don't know. But but anyway, I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind. And you're welcome, absolutely. And so you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will be back again. Yeah, even though it's July 4, I'll be back tomorrow morning. So we'll see you then. Take care.